Hello everyone, welcome back to part 9 of my Lua tutorial series for absolute beginners. In this episode, we're going to be discussing metatables and metamethods, and specifically, we're going to be discussing the index metamethod. So, this is going to be very important because next episode we're going to be discussing object-oriented programming, which is very important in almost all programming languages. And then we're going to discuss metatables in more detail a little bit later on in another episode. There are a few more meta methods that we're going to discuss. We're just going to focus on what's called the index meta method in this episode, and I'm going to explain how that works in this episode. And you'll see how that's relevant in the next episode. So, let's get into it. So firstly, what is a metatable? Well, let's say that we have a certain table, and we'll call it defaults. We'll make it a local variable. And we'll say color equals blue, width equals 100, height 100. And then we'll make a second table, and we'll call this just table 1. I'm not very creative today. So with this table, we're just going to have one field here. It's going to be color, and it's going to be red. So what if we also wanted to have some kind of default values for this table 1 table right here? What will we do, and how would we make that work? Well, what we can do in Lua is we can basically have another table where it gets this information, these default values from. It kind of inherits that information from that other table, and basically we can do that using this method in Lua, which is called set metatable. So keep in mind what we're trying to do here is, for example, if I wanted to look at table 1 and I wanted to access a width, but I don't have a width defined here, right? I don't have it written out here, but if I just want to access the width, what it's going to do is it's going to look it up in the meta table, and basically it's going to say, okay, what's the default width in this defaults table, which is the meta table for table 1, and the default width here is 100, so the width here is just going to be 100. And the same thing, for example, for height, but you're going to see, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit, that because we have set this here, when we try and print this out, this value here is going to basically overwrite the default value. We'll see that in a second here. So first, as the first parameter to this function, what we put in is the table that we want to use, and then we set this, we say index equals, and then defaults. So we pass it in as a table basically, and we say that table is equal to defaults. Now, if I want to print table1 dot width and table1 dot height and table1 print let's see what this does. So as you can see, we didn't define any values here for width and height. We just defined a value for color. But because we set defaults as a meta table, whenever we do something like that, it says, okay, well, there's no value here, but there is a meta table, so I'm going to just look it up in the meta table and see what the value is, what the default value is, and we're just going to use that as the default value. And it does the same thing for height. As you can see, both of these are 100, 100, which is exactly what we defined here. However, we said that the color here is red, but the color in the meta table is blue. So when this is printed out, we're basically overwriting, because we set this value here. When we print out table1.color, it prints out red instead of blue, instead of the default, because we say, okay, well, we don't want to use the default. We want to use whatever we set on our own. So that's one example of how metatables are used in Lua, and how, in particular, this index meta method is what makes it happen. Index is basically the key to all of this, and it's a very important meta method. It is a function, basically, or a table. This can either be a function or a table, and I'll show you in a second how to make this into a function if you wanted to. But basically, it just says, okay, well, look it up at this table, or look up the default values in this function. So I'll show you now how to do it in a function. Alright, so our second example here is using the set metatable method with a function this time, instead of using a table. So to show you how this works, for example, let's create a table. We'll call it person, and this person will have a name. Let's say Thomas. Age, let's say 22. And then we're going to use set metatable, and we're going to say person, and then here we're just going to put this, and then we're going to create index equals function. So now the index meta method is basically pointing to a function. So it says, okay, when we need to look up the index, when there's some missing value, some default value that we need to look up, we need to execute this function, and this will determine what the missing value, or what the default value basically is going to be. Now, in this function, we're going to have to accept two parameters, and those two are going to be table and key. And then what we're going to want to do is, if key equals, for example, greeting, then, and what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to return this. Hello, I'm table.name, and I'm table.age years old. And then, if that's not the case, then we're just going to return, oops, key doesn't exist in this table. And I think that's it. So now, if we print person.name, we do print person.age, and then print person.greeting, and then we're going to also want to do, for example, print person.email. So all I'm doing is basically just printing different fields that we've defined here, and also within this new metatable function that we've defined, which will basically give us, if we look for the key greeting, if key equals greeting, then it will give us, this output here. Otherwise, it'll tell us, hey, this key is not in the table. So now let's save, and let's go run. So as you can see, first two lines here correspond to these. It prints out the name, which is Thomas. the age, which is 22, and then it says, okay, now we have greeting here. So what this is going to do is it's going to look up, hey, what's the meta table here? What's the index metamethod? And the index metamethod is this function right here. So it checks, okay, if key is equal to greeting, then return this output, and it's going to return, hello, I'm Thomas and I'm 22 years old. Otherwise, it's going to return, oops, this doesn't exist. Email doesn't exist in this table. And so that's it. That's the basics of metatables and of the index metatable specifically. There are index metamethod. There are other meta methods out there, and we will discuss them later on. But this is the most important one that you should know, and it is very useful, and you'll see why in the next episode once we start discussing object-oriented programming. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like on the channel, and please subscribe for more videos. And thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time.